My husband has a history of renal colic, kidney stones, and he had a kidney removed about 14 years ago. Last December he became unwell and I contacted our local surgery. He had medication for what we thought was a UTI. He had a UTI. But on Wednesday the 11th of December he became really ill. I was very concerned. I rang our surgery twice and they sent out the district nurse who catheterised him because he wasn't able to pass any urine, and he still couldn't pass any urine. So needless to say, both the nurse and our GP were very, very concerned, and he was sent into hospital as an emergency. This was about 4:30 in the afternoon. The ambulance was out on a call and would not have been in our house until 7 o'clock at night. So I said, right, if you can sit in the car, if you're comfortable enough, I'll take you to Altnagalvin, which I did, and had him in A&E at 6 o'clock. He was triaged at about 8 and put into a cubicle. I think they put a drip up. They changed the catheter, which our doctor wouldn't allow. And that went on and on and on. He may have passed some urine, very little. That went on and on and on. In fact, twice I went out to the corridor to see if there was anybody around or if they had forgotten about us. I decided then my husband would need something to drink, so would I, and I didn't realise the shop closed at 9 o'clock. So anyway, I went and bought a bottle of Fanta or something from a vending machine. About maybe 1 o'clock, the doctor said he was going to admit my husband, and that went on, and I think he was probably in the ward sometime after 3. Now, we were 9 hours in A&E, which I do not think is acceptable. My husband was 85. He was admitted to the ward. I was in the hospital at 6 o'clock in the evening, and I was leaving at 20 to 4 the next morning. My husband was very concerned about me going home on my own, but I was okay. Now, our GP requested an urgent scan of the renal area because of his history. I kept asking, when is he going to have this scan? Nobody seemed to have any care plan. Nobody seemed to know what was happening. So he was in hospital Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and still wasn't scanned. On Sunday afternoon, I was visiting, and I noticed that they had emptied the urine bag, and there was no urine in that bag from 3 o'clock. Now, I was very concerned about him because we noticed as well his face and hands and tummy were swelling. I rang the hospital about 9, and they said, no, he hasn't passed any urine. Rang at 10, rang at 11. They told me the doctors were working with him. I rang again at 12. I rang at 6 in the morning. I rang at 9 in the morning, and I rang at 11. I was really told off at 9 o'clock and told, this isn't a very good time to be ringing. I rang at 11 and was told that, yes, my husband had had a scan. And I said, look, I'm coming down. I want to see somebody. This is a disgrace. So when I went down, my husband was in a side ward, and to say he was out of it is no exaggeration. To me, he was dying. Face, hands, tummy swollen. He was probably aware I was there because I went and spoke to him. Anyway, he'd had the scan. Then the urology people wanted a CT scan. And the whole problem was a tiny stone lodged in the bottom of the ureter. Now, knowing his history, that should have been picked up. I complained to the hospital, and I had a reply. In the reply, they told me that the request for an urgent scan was downgraded to routine, which meant that there was no urgency to do it. There were a couple of questions that things I wasn't satisfied with, so I wrote back again. I had another reply last week. I discovered that the consultant who put in the request for the urgent scan failed to mention this man has only 1 kidney and a history of renal colic. And to me, that is a disgrace. There was a total lack of communication between the ward and radiology. Why a consultant would allow his request to be downgraded from urgent to routine, I don't know. I listened to these ladies here, and one of them said that there was a lot of ageism in the health service, and my daughters believe that because my husband was an old man, he was discriminated against. I know there was a younger man in, when he was back in again, who was scanned straight away, had surgery to remove the stone. Anyhow, my husband had to have emergency surgery to put in a stent and bypass the stone. The consultant could not take out the stone that Monday night at 10 o'clock because his INR was 5.5, which it shouldn't have been, and there was a risk of bleeding. So he had to have a stent put in and had to go back in 2 months to have the stone removed, and then back the following week to have the stent out. That illness put him completely off his feet. He had fallen in the beginning of the year, had a fractured femur. His mobility was, well, coming on quite good. But after that surgery, he literally couldn't stand, and he ended up almost a month in hospital, had to come back to the county hospital here for rehab. And to us, it was a disaster from start to finish. Nobody seemed to listen to you. There was a total lack of communication between consultants, radiology, even ourselves. When I asked about scans and things, nobody seemed to know. You talk about dignity for the elderly. They stuck them in a wheelchair and brought them to the toilet rather than getting them to walk. My husband never had a shower from he went into hospital on the Wednesday night, Thursday morning, until, well, I don't know when, because he was so ill then following the surgery. And that was a hugely traumatic experience, not only for me, but for our family and for my husband as well. He still gets upset when we talk about it. You know, it was completely unnecessary. Things could have been so different had he been scanned urgently, as our GP asked.
Okay, you've been very, very clear, very articulate. I've just a couple of questions, I think. I'd probably separate them up into segments. So, Iris, if I may. Looking back on that experience, what would have made it if we were the powers that be rather than the chair of this particular inquiry?
Well,
what would you be saying? And I want to segment it into, first of all, what could have been done differently in the emergency department first.
Yeah.
Then what could have been done differently once your
I think
hospital.
There doesn't seem to be any urgency in the emergency department. They tell you they were very busy that night. But I mean, when I went out to the corridor maybe about 11 or 12 o'clock, there was nobody around. And, you know, I had to go looking for someone. I said, look, we're still in here. Have you forgotten about us? What are you going to do? So I don't know, is it lack of organisation? They talk about money in the health service. It's not a lack of money, it's a lack of organisation, I think.
Okay. And when you first came into the emergency department, did they give you any sense of expectation of how long it might be there?
No.
So you had no idea whether you would be seen in an hour, 5 hours?
I asked my boys the next day, what time do you think I left the hospital? And they said, about 12, half 12. Couldn't believe it when I told them 20 to 4.
Okay. And then in terms of the hospital care itself, again, what would be?
Nursing care was a disaster.
Okay.
One of my daughters is a nurse, and she pointed out so many things that were like charts, fluid intake and output not being totaled. So I mean, if you don't total it, you don't know how much is going in, how much is coming out. If there's a drip up and the person isn't getting rid of any urine, obviously they're going to fill up with fluids and that. And no, the nursing care, the other daughter said to me when she walked into the ward on the Sunday afternoon, she says, Mummy, I got the impression that those are all old people and they're just in there to die. You know, that was her impression coming in. And no, the nursing care was not good. There's a whole lot of things that I pointed out. In the reply to me, they didn't say, we're sorry that you felt the nursing care was not what should be expected. They said, we are sorry that the standard of nursing care was not what would be expected in a modern teaching hospital today in 2013. So, I mean, it wasn't my gripe. Everything that I complained about was upheld and apologised for.
Okay, and that brings me very neatly to my final question before I pass over to colleagues. When you went through the complaints procedure, at the start of what was it you were looking for, and did you feel you got it, what you were looking for in terms of, and just tell us the experience.
I was looking for answers because it was total neglect and carelessness as far as we were concerned. And I listed all those things that I have told you today. Now, it took them 4 months to get a reply to me, but I must say it was a very thorough investigation. And the fact that I know radiology downgraded into routine is because that was written in the answer. Yes, they did. And what else did you ask me?
It was just how you found the complaints procedure, and did you get what you wanted from the procedure?
I did, more or less. Now, there were a couple of things they did not answer, like how closely his bloods were monitored. Because had his bloods been monitored closely, they'd have seen that the urea and the electrolyte and the creatinine levels were all rising. They said, I wrote all that, and also his INR going up to 5.5. You know, again, it wasn't checked, I know, on the Saturday and the Sunday. But they wrote back to me and they said that he was monitored, but whether that meant his bloods were taken, I don't know. The second letter I got, I felt there was more sort of waffle, if you like, in it, and they did repeat a lot of the things that they said in the first letter. But I suppose I'm reasonably satisfied in that they have basically apologised unreservedly.
Okay, and just finally, did you actually have a face-to-face meeting, or was it all done through correspondence?
It was all done through correspondence. I did talk to one of the SHOs the day my husband was so ill, and I just said to him, why let patients get so ill? And he said, but it was really only Sunday your husband became really ill. I mean, I know that. But at the same time, I would say to preempt these things is much more sensible than waiting till a patient is really, really sick, and then it's a longer stay in hospital, and there's a lot more risks and everything involved in it, you know. I spoke to them about it. One of my daughters said, write it down, because if you write, they are obliged to reply to you. You can go in and complain, and, well, that's the end of it. But if you write it down and you have it all listed out consistently and methodically, and you know your dates and your times and everything, your facts and figures, I think they have to give you an answer.
Okay, thank you. That's been great. Marion?
Mrs. Russell, that was very helpful. I'm just wondering, you said one of your daughters talked about your husband being in a ward which was full of elderly people who looked as if they were close to death. And I'm wondering, when did he actually get to the urology ward?
On the Monday evening, about 6 o'clock. I queried that as well, because our doctor wanted him sent to urology. In fact, she wanted him admitted to urology, but apparently the hospital doesn't do that today. They send you to A&E, and then you're farmed out to wherever. Apparently there was a shortage of beds in urology, because I've queried that a couple of times as well. Yet it's amazing, when he was very ill, a bed can be found straight away. But anyway, they said there was a lot of pressure on beds that day. So he went to the urology ward when in the evening, maybe about 6 o'clock or so, and he'd had the scan about 3, so the CT scan.
So in your view then, he went to emergency department when the doctor your own GP had said he needed to go to urology, and when he went to the emergency department, he didn't get to the specialist ward that he needed?
No, he didn't.
Right. Okay, thank you.
He was sent to a ward for acute care for the elderly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Russell. I've just got one small question. You've been very clear and very critical, for reasons I understand, about the emergency care. In your statement, in your written statement, you make a reference to the quality of care in the urology department.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, it was second to none. The consultant was absolutely fantastic, and really so concerned. My husband went to the theatre about 10 to 10, and as soon as he had finished, he came. I was waiting in the hospital. He came to me at 11 o'clock at night and told me everything had gone okay. He came to see my husband 3 times the next day. Was very concerned about this high INR and had to give him an injection to reverse it. And I'll just say one thing. When we went back 2 months later for my husband to have the stent removed, which allowed the urine to flow past the stone, we were sitting in the ward waiting to be admitted. He came down the corridor, saw us, stopped, came in, knew who we were, and knew all about my husband's history. And I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
So first-class care in one department, and far from it in another.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Not at all.
I've one tiny thing to finish, and you mentioned in your evidence that you'd been, I think, in the emergency department for about 3.5 hours when you then went to get something to eat or drink,
yeah.
and didn't realise that the cafe had closed
Yeah,
at 9
yeah,
o'clock. So would it have been helpful if, on arrival, even a note that just said something like, the cafe closes at 9
Yeah,
o'clock, have
or-
been useful for you, rather than have to then use a...
Or if you want a cup of tea, you know, or whatever. It's something you don't think of when you're in a situation and you're concerned and you know there's something wrong, and time doesn't exist when you're in there, really. And it's, I suppose I blame myself for my stupidity afterwards, not thinking of it, but it was just one of those things.
Okay, no, that's been very, very clear.
Thank you.
Very articulate. It's really very important for us to hear from people and family members who have experienced the services directly, alongside all those who provide them and those who commission services. It's absolutely vital to us. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion? Is there anything else you want to say, or you think that you've missed, or that we've not picked up on?
I don't know, just to say that if people don't complain, the health service doesn't know that things are going wrong and that there are problems. And I do know, since I complained, and this all came up about radiology downgrading my husband, that radiology was being monitored for 3 months after that, just to make sure that they were carrying out, I suppose, scans, x-rays, whatever, as they had been requested. You know. And it's okay saying, oh, people complain, but they won't write it down. I think it's important to write it down.
Okay.
And to be sure of your facts and figures when you do.
And is there anything, any suggestions you have as to anything else that would help facilitate or more easily the complaints procedure, or did you find once you decided?
No, the complaints procedure, they were very good, and actually they did write and say, look, we aim to respond inside a month. We're sorry we haven't all the investigations done. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. They did ring me, they did write to me, and I was happy enough about that, yes.
Iris, thank you. That's been really, really helpful. It's
Thank you.
really vital to our inquiry that we hear
Thank
from
you.
people who've got first-hand experience of an emergency department. So thanks for giving up your time
Thank
today.
you very much.
That's been
Thank
great.
you. Thank you for listening to
Not
me.
at all.
Thank you.
You.